My name is Clara Vance, and I am 34 years old. By trade, I'm a chartered financial analyst, but my real passion, the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning, is real estate. I own 12 properties now, a small but growing portfolio that represents more than just income. It represents a promise I made to myself a long, long time ago. I never imagined, though, that the fulfillment of that promise would lead to the single most surreal day of my life, the day my parents, the very people who had left me with nothing, stood before me, their heads bowed, ready to sign a lease for a roof over their heads, a roof that I owned. It wasn't the kind of victory I had ever fantasized about, but in that quiet, echoing moment, it felt like the closing of a cosmic ledger, a form of justice so poetic it was almost painful. Before I dive into how I went from being their discarded daughter to their last and only hope, I want to connect with all of you listening. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever felt underestimated or had to fight twice as hard just to get to the starting line, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And for all the new viewers, make sure you subscribe to join this community of resilient souls who understand that sometimes the hardest battles are fought within our own families. The foundation of my story, like so many others, was built in the quiet, unassuming rooms of my childhood home. It was a perfectly average house on a perfectly average suburban street. But inside, a silent hierarchy reigned. My father, Richard, was a man who valued appearances and bold gestures. He saw the world in terms of potential, but his definition of potential was narrow and loud. My mother, Helen, was his echo, a woman who had long ago tethered her own happiness to his approval, reinforcing his worldview with a nervous, fluttering loyalty. And at the center of their universe was my older brother, Leo. Leo was born with a charisma that could charm a snake out of its skin. He was all flash and promise, a walking, talking embodiment of my father's dreams. I, on the other hand, was quiet. I was the observer, the planner, the one who found solace not in grand pronouncements, but in the steady, predictable logic of numbers. This difference was not just a personality quirk. In my family, it was a flaw. I remember one specific Tuesday afternoon when I was 9. I had come home clutching a certificate from school, my name printed on it in elegant calligraphy. I had won the district-wide math competition, a feat that had my teacher, Mr. Albright, beaming with pride. I ran into the house, my heart thumping with a rare and hopeful excitement, ready to finally present my parents with an achievement they couldn't ignore. But as I burst into the living room, I found them fawning over Leo, who was straddling a brand new gleaming 10-speed bicycle. The bike was a reward, my father announced, for Leo scoring the winning goal in his soccer game over the weekend. A single goal. My certificate, representing weeks of studying and the correct calculation of complex problems under pressure, felt flimsy and insignificant in my hand. I held it out. "Look what I got," I whispered. My father glanced at it, a brief, dismissive nod. "That's nice, honey. Numbers are good. Now look at this bike, Italian engineering." My mother just smiled, her eyes fixed on Leo. "Isn't he something?" she murmured. I slowly let my arm fall, the corner of the certificate crumpling in my fist. That evening, I tucked it away in a shoebox under my bed, the first piece of evidence in a case I didn't yet know I was building. The pattern was relentless. Family vacations were scheduled around Leo's sports camps. His fleeting interests, from magic tricks to building model rockets, were funded with an enthusiasm that bordered on religious fervor. My passions were quieter, and therefore less valuable. I loved to read, to save, to plan. The only person who seemed to understand this was my grandmother, Evelyn. She was my mother's mother, a woman with a practical soul and eyes that saw past the noise. She lived 2 towns over, but her visits were my sanctuary. She didn't praise me for being quiet. She celebrated me for being thoughtful. On my 10th birthday, While my parents gave me a doll I didn't want, Grandma Evelyn gave me a heavy ceramic piggy bank shaped like a wise old owl. "This isn't for spending, Clara," she told me, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "This is for growing. Every dollar you put in here, imagine it's a seed. With time and patience, it'll grow into a tree." She explained compound interest to me in a way that made my brain light up. It wasn't just math, it was magic. It was a promise that small, consistent efforts could lead to something big. Over the years, that owl grew heavy with my allowance, with cash from odd jobs, and with the birthday money I'd save while Leo spent his on the latest gadgets. When Grandma Evelyn passed away just after I turned 16, it felt like the world had lost its anchor. The house was filled with a performative grief from my parents, but I felt a genuine hollowing loss. In her will, she left a small sum of money directly to me, $5,000. For her education, the will stipulated, because she is the one who understands the value of an investment. My parents were slightly offended by the implication, but they couldn't touch it. I deposited it into a separate account, along with the contents of the Wise Owl Bank. This was my college fund. It was more than money, it was Grandma Evelyn's belief in me, made tangible. It was my future, a future I was carefully, painstakingly building for myself, $1 at a time. As we moved into my late teens, Leo's ambitions began to take on a more official and expensive shape. He wasn't just interested in hobbies anymore, he was a serial entrepreneur. At 17, it was a line of custom-designed skateboards. At 18, it was a social media platform for pet owners. Each idea was presented with a dazzling PowerPoint presentation in the living room, filled with buzzwords and projected earnings that seemed to defy logic. My father would watch, his chest puffed with pride. "Look at him, Helen. The boy's a visionary." They poured money into these ventures without a second thought. My father cashed in some of his own stocks. My mother dipped into their savings. It was always an investment in his future. My own future felt much more concrete and far less flashy. I worked 30 hours a week at a local diner, the smell of grease and coffee clinging to me long after my shifts ended. I was saving every penny for college. I had my heart set on a state university with a top-tier business program. With my grades, a partial academic scholarship was likely, but the rest of the tuition, the room and board, the books, that was on me. My college fund, which had grown to a respectable $17,000 through my savings and careful management of Grandma Evelyn's gift, was my lifeline. My parents saw my part-time job not as a necessity born of their financial choices, but as a character-building exercise. "It's good for you, Clara," my mother would say. "Teaches you the value of a dollar." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. One particularly stark incident occurred the winter of my senior year. Leo, driving the family's new sedan, swerved to avoid a squirrel and wrapped the car around a telephone pole. He was fine, thankfully, but the car was totaled. I came home from my shift to find my parents coddling him on the sofa, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, as if he'd survived a war. There was no anger, only relief. The next week, my father co-signed a loan for Leo to get a sporty new coupe. "He needs reliable transportation for his business meetings," was the justification. That same week, the city bus service reduced its routes, and my walk to the diner in the freezing sleet became 45 minutes each way. I asked if just maybe I could get a ride now and then. My father sighed, looking at his newspaper. "Clara, you know Leo's schedule is packed, and I have my own work. The walk is good exercise." The message was clear. Leo's convenience was a necessity, mine was an inconvenience. The spring of my senior year arrived, and with it, an acceptance letter from my dream university. It came with the partial scholarship I had hoped for. I was ecstatic. I had done it. My hard work, my late nights, my careful saving, it had all paid off. I showed my parents the letter, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of genuine pride in their eyes. "We knew you could do it," my father said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You've always been the responsible one." That word, responsible, felt less like a compliment and more like a label, a box they put me in so they didn't have to feel guilty. That summer was supposed to be a triumphant final lap. I worked extra shifts, dreaming of campus life, of finance lectures and late-night study sessions in the library. I imagined myself walking into a world of my own making, funded by my own hands and my grandmother's love. The first tuition installment was due on August 1st. A week before the deadline, I sat down at the family computer to make the transfer. I logged into my bank account, my heart doing a little flutter of anticipation. I clicked on the college fund savings account. And then I stared. The screen had to be wrong. It had to be a glitch. The balance, which should have been just over $17,000, read $14,017. I clicked on the transaction history. My vision blurred as I scanned the list of withdrawals. $10,000 transferred out 2 months ago. Another $7,000 transferred a month after that. The recipient for both transfers was an account I didn't recognize, but the memo line for each was chillingly clear: LV Enterprises, seed funding. A roar started in my ears, a sound of pure disbelieving rage. I stumbled out of the den and into the kitchen where my parents were enjoying a glass of wine. Leo was there too, scrolling on his phone. My voice, when it came out, was a strangled rasp. "The money, it's gone." My mother looked up, a confused little frown on her face. "What money, dear?" "My college fund. It's gone. You took it." My father set his glass down with a heavy thud. His expression wasn't one of guilt, but of annoyance. He was being inconvenienced. "Clara, lower your voice. It's not gone. It's been invested." "Invested? You stole my money. That was my future." I was screaming now, tears of fury streaming down my face. "It was for school." "It was an emergency," he said, his voice hard and defensive. Leo's new venture, the gourmet toast delivery service, he needed a final injection of capital to secure the commercial kitchen space. It was a sure thing. The return would have been massive. "It was my money," I shrieked, turning to my brother, who was now looking up from his phone with a look of mild irritation. You let them do this." Leo had the audacity to look wounded. "Hey, don't look at me. I told them it was a great opportunity. And I was going to pay you back, sis, double. You just have to be patient." Patient, the word hung in the air, a monument to their delusion. "My tuition is due next week," I sobbed. "What am I supposed to do?" My mother finally spoke, her voice laced with that infuriating, placating tone she used when she wanted a problem to disappear. "Oh, Clara, don't be so dramatic. It's just money. You're so smart and resourceful. You'll figure something out. We're a family, and family helps family." That was it. That was the line that broke me. Family helps family. But in our family, the help only ever flowed in one direction, towards Leo. I was not family to be helped. I was a resource to be tapped. The dream of college, of a life I had built for myself, crumbled into dust right there on the linoleum floor of our kitchen. In their eyes, I saw no remorse, no apology. I saw only justification and a baffling sense of righteousness. They hadn't just taken my money, they had taken my trust, my hope, and my belief that I mattered to them at all. I was completely and utterly alone. The weeks that followed the great betrayal were a blur of numb, directionless despair. The August 1st deadline came and went. I called the university's admissions office, my voice cracking as I explained that I could no longer afford to attend. The woman on the other end was sympathetic but firm. My spot would be given to someone on the wait list. The door to my meticulously planned future had not just closed, it had been slammed shut and bolted from the inside by my own family. I moved through my days like a ghost in my own life. I quit the diner because I couldn't stand the well-meaning questions from my former coworkers about my college plans. I took a job at a 24-hour convenience store, working the graveyard shift because it meant I didn't have to talk to anyone. The nights were long and silent, punctuated only by the hum of the beverage coolers and the occasional lonely customer buying milk or cigarettes. During the day, I would try to sleep, but my parents' house, once a home, felt like a prison. They treated the situation with a willful ignorance that was more painful than any argument. They'd talk about their day, about the weather, about anything but the gaping wound they had created in my life. On social media, I saw photos of them with Leo. They'd taken a trip to San Francisco, a business trip to research artisanal bread for his now faltering gourmet toast empire. They were smiling, posing by the Golden Gate Bridge, while I was stocking shelves and trying not to cry every time I saw a college-aged kid come in for a late-night snack. The resentment festered inside me, a toxic, burning coal. I felt trapped, not just in my parents' house, but in the life they had chosen for me. I was adrift without a map or a compass. One night, during a particularly slow shift around 3 a.m, I was listlessly flipping through the channels on the small television behind the counter. I paused on a commercial. It was for the United States Army. Soldiers in crisp uniforms were shown rappelling from helicopters, working on complex equipment, and sitting in classrooms. A deep, authoritative voice spoke of discipline, honor, and purpose. And then it came to the part that made me sit up straight. The GI Bill. "Serve your country," the voiceover said, "and will help you pay for your education." Education. The word cut through the fog of my despair like a lighthouse beam. It was a path. It wasn't the path I had planned, but it was a path out. The idea was terrifying. Me, in the army. I was a quiet, bookish girl who had never even been in a fistfight. But what was the alternative? To stay here drowning in my parents' indifference, my potential slowly shriveling and dying. The next morning, on 2 hours of sleep and a potent cocktail of desperation and newfound resolve, I walked into the Army recruitment office in the strip mall next to my work. The air inside smelled of strong coffee and pine sol. A man in a uniform so sharply pressed it could have cut glass sat behind a desk. He introduced himself as Sergeant Miller. He had a kind, tired face and looked at me not as a problem but as a person. I told him my story. I didn't hold back. I told him about the college fund, the betrayal, the feeling of having no options. I expected him to be dismissive, but he just listened, nodding slowly. When I was finished, he looked me straight in the eye. "The Army doesn't care where you came from, Vance," he said, already using my last name. "It only cares about what you're willing to become. It will be the hardest thing you have ever done, but if you make it through, it will give you a foundation no one can ever take away from you, not a single person." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. He laid out a clear, structured plan. He showed me the list of military occupational specialties, the jobs. My eyes immediately found it. Financial management technician. It felt like fate. Using the military's own systems to learn about finance, the very thing my family had used to destroy my dreams, felt like a perfect poetic justice. That day, I signed the papers. Telling my parents was an exercise in futility. I sat them down that evening and told them I had enlisted. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "The Army? Clara, no. It's so dangerous. Is this really necessary? You're being so dramatic." My father just shook his head, a look of profound disappointment on his face, as if I were a failing investment. "Running away to join the circus won't solve your problems," he said gruffly. Leo, ever the narcissist, was almost excited. "Wow, that's intense. You have to send me some cool pictures from boot camp." They didn't see it as a choice I was making for my future. They saw it as a bizarre, theatrical reaction to my disappointment over the money. Their lack of understanding was the final confirmation I needed. I was doing the right thing. Basic training was Just as Sergeant Miller had promised, the hardest thing I had ever done. It was a crucible of physical and mental exhaustion, designed to strip you down to your core and build you back up as something stronger. I was pushed past limits I never knew I had. But for every grueling ruck march and every pre-dawn wake-up call, there was a corresponding lesson in resilience. I discovered a physical toughness I never knew I possessed. And more importantly, I found a sisterhood. In the barracks, your background didn't matter. The money your parents had, the car you drove, the person you were before, it was all irrelevant. All that mattered was whether you could count on the person next to you. It was there I met Maya. She was a fast-talking girl from Chicago with a wicked sense of humor and a core of steel. We bonded over our shared misery during early morning drills and our mutual love for trashy novels we'd trade back and forth. She became my family, the real kind, the kind that shows up. She listened to my story about my parents and brother and didn't offer platitudes. She offered righteous anger on my behalf. "They're leeches, Clara," she'd say. "You're better off without them." She was right. After basic, I went to my advanced training to become a financial management technician. I thrived. The world of military finance was all about rules, regulations, and accountability. Every dollar had to be tracked, every transaction justified. It was the antithesis of my family's chaotic, self-serving approach to money. I was good at it. I was more than good. I was exceptional. My commanding officer, a stern but fair master sergeant named Davis, took notice. He saw my aptitude and my quiet determination. "Vance," he said to me one day, "you have a good head on your shoulders. Don't let this place be the end of your education. Use that GI Bill. Use every single penny of it. Squeeze every drop of opportunity out of this that you can." His words became my mantra. During my 4-year enlistment stationed in Germany, I started taking online college courses at night. I chipped away at my prerequisites, my mind sharp and focused. The Army had given me the structure and discipline I always craved, and now it was giving me the means to reclaim the dream that had been stolen from me. The occasional phone calls from home were like dispatches from another planet. They were always brief and superficial. "How's Germany? Is the food any good?" They never asked about my work, my progress, my life. Then, about 2 years into my service, the tone began to shift. The calls started to include casual, probing questions about money. "You must be saving a lot over there, with your housing and food paid for," my mother would say. Leo's gourmet toast business had, predictably, failed. Now he was on to his next brilliant idea, an app that would allow users to rate the mouthfeel of artisanal waters. It needed funding, of course. I learned to say no. The first time was terrifying. My voice shook, but I said it. "No, I can't send you any money." The silence on the other end of the line was thick with shock and indignation. "After all we did for you?" my mother asked, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. The question was so absurd it was almost funny. "What exactly did you do for me?" I asked, my voice suddenly calm and clear. She didn't have an answer. That was the day the first real boundary was drawn. When my 4 years were up, I was honorably discharged. I walked away from the Army a different woman. I was 24, disciplined, with a healthy savings account, a network of loyal friends, and the full post-9/11 GI Bill in my pocket. I moved to a city with a great state university and enrolled as a full-time finance major. I lived simply, renting a tiny apartment and focusing on my studies. My military experience gave me a maturity and focus that set me apart from my younger classmates. I graduated summa cum laude. My first taste of real estate came from the VA. The VA home loan was another benefit I had earned, a powerful tool for veterans. I didn't want to just buy a house. I wanted to make an investment, just like Grandma Evelyn had taught me. I found a small, slightly run-down duplex in an up-and-coming neighborhood. It was more than I could afford on a traditional loan, but the VA loan, with its zero down payment option, made it possible. I spent the first 6 months living in one unit, dust and drywall in my hair every weekend as I painstakingly renovated the other side myself, using skills I'd picked up from YouTube tutorials and sheer grit. Finally, it was ready. I placed an ad and found my first tenants, a young couple with a new baby. The day they moved in, they handed me their first rent check. Holding it, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment that dwarfed any academic award I'd ever received. This was real. This was mine. I hadn't just bought a property, I had laid the cornerstone of my own empire, and no one could ever take it away from me. The decade after my discharge from the Army was a study in quiet, relentless progress. I landed a competitive job at a top financial firm, where my military discipline and no-nonsense approach to analysis were highly valued. While my colleagues were buying flashy cars and expensive watches, I was living by a simple code: live on half, invest the other half. The rental income from my first duplex became the seed money for my next down payment, and then the next. I bought another duplex, then a small single-family home, then a 4-unit apartment building. I became an expert in finding undervalued properties, managing renovations, and screening tenants. My life was a fortress of my own making, built brick by brick with my own effort. My contact with my family, in the meantime, had dwindled to a trickle. It consisted of a few awkward holiday phone calls, and the occasional birthday card with a $20 bill tucked inside, a gesture so laughably inadequate, it felt more like an insult than a kindness. They knew I was successful in a vague, abstract way, but they had no concept of the scale. To them, I was just Clara, who's good with money. Leo, predictably, had continued his spectacular streak of failures. After the artisanal water app came a subscription box for curated dog toys, followed by an ill-fated attempt to import alpaca wool sweaters from a supplier who turned out to be a scam artist. Each failure was more costly than the last, and each time, my parents bailed him out. They had remortgaged their home, the one I grew up in, not once but twice. They sold off my mother's jewelry, including pieces that had belonged to Grandma Evelyn, a desecration that made my blood boil when I found out through a stray comment from a cousin. They bled themselves dry for the golden child who produced nothing but debt and disappointment. I had long since stopped feeling anger. It had been replaced by a cold, detached pity. They were caught in a cycle of their own making, and I wanted no part of it. The call that changed everything came on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was in my office, reviewing quarterly earnings reports, when my cell phone buzzed. It was my mother. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some instinct made me answer. "Clara?" Her voice was a choked, watery whisper. I had never heard her sound so broken. "Mom, what's wrong?" "It's all gone, Clara," she sobbed, the words tumbling out in a torrent of panic. "Everything. The house, the bank, it's all gone." I listened, my own heart a steady, slow drum against my ribs, as she unraveled the story. Leo's latest scheme had been his grandest and most destructive. He had convinced them to invest their entire remaining retirement savings, and the last of the equity from their house, into a new cryptocurrency he had invented. It was, he had promised, the next Bitcoin. It turned out to be the next nothing. The currency was worthless, the platform a ghost, and the money had vanished into the digital ether, likely into Leo's own pockets before he, too, disappeared. The bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings on their house. They had 30 days to vacate. They were 65 and 67 years old, with no savings, no retirement, and no home. They were bankrupt. "We have nowhere to go," she wailed. Can we come stay with you? Just for a little while, until we get back on our feet?" The request hung in the air, heavy with a decade of unspoken history. The old me, the little girl desperate for their approval, might have said yes. She might have seen it as a chance to finally be the hero, to earn their love. But that girl was long gone. The woman who answered the phone was a landlord, an investor, a survivor. "No, Mom," I said, my voice gentle but unyielding. "You can't live with me. My life, my space, it's not set up for that." The silence on her end was a mixture of shock and wounded pride. They had never considered the possibility that I would refuse. "But what will we do?" she whispered, her voice small and lost. A plan began to form in my mind, cold and clear and perfect in its terrible symmetry. It wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about balance. It was about closing a ledger that had been left open for far too long. "Don't panic," I said, my tone shifting to one of practical, detached helpfulness. "Let me make some calls. I know of a place, a modest townhouse, but it's clean and in a safe neighborhood. I think the owner might have a vacancy. I can put in a good word for you." Relief flooded her voice. "Oh, Clara, would you? Thank you so much." They were so desperate, so consumed by their own crisis that they didn't question it. They didn't ask who the owner was or how I knew them. They just clung to the lifeline I had offered. I spent the next 2 days setting the stage. I called Jessica, the property manager who handled most of my portfolio. I explained the situation, omitting the personal details. "I have some prospective tenants," I told her. "They're an older couple on a fixed income. They've had some financial hardship. I want you to run their application, but I'm pre-approving them. Just handle the paperwork as you normally would." Jessica, a consummate professional, simply nodded. "No problem, Clara. What's the address?" I gave her the address of a 2-bedroom townhouse I had purchased 2 years prior. It was my least glamorous property, but it was solid and well-maintained. Jessica handled the application process over the phone with my parents. They qualified, but just barely, on their Social Security income. They were told the owner required a standard background check, a security deposit, and the first month's rent. They scraped the money together from what little they had left. The final step, Jessica informed them, was the lease signing. It would take place at the property itself. The owner, Jessica explained coolly, likes to meet all new tenants in person before finalizing the agreement. It's just a formality. The day of the signing arrived, crisp and clear. I spent the morning in a state of hyper-focused calm. I chose my outfit with deliberate care: a tailored navy blue pantsuit, a silk blouse, and low heels that made a firm, decisive sound on a hardwood floor. I looked every bit the successful professional I was. I drove to the townhouse and parked a block away, watching. I saw my parents' old beat-up car pull up to the curb. They got out slowly, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen them. My father's shoulders were slumped, his usual bluster completely gone. My mother clutched her purse to her chest like a shield. They looked like what they were, defeated. They walked up the path and Jessica met them at the door, shaking their hands and leading them inside. I waited 5 minutes, letting them settle, letting the reality of their new, diminished circumstances sink in. Then, I got out of my car, smoothed down my suit, and walked towards the front door. I could see them through the front window, sitting at a cheap dining set I'd put in the empty unit for staging. They were hunched over the lease agreement, a pile of papers that represented their last and only option. Jessica looked up as I approached the door, giving me a subtle, professional nod. The doorbell didn't need to be rung. I simply opened the door and stepped inside, pulling it shut behind me with a soft, definitive click. The sound made them both look up. Their faces, in that moment, are seared into my memory forever. First, there was confusion. Why was Clara here? Then a flicker of recognition, immediately followed by a wave of utter, profound shock. Their mouths fell open. My mother's hand, holding a pen, froze over the paper. My father's face went slack, the blood draining from it, until he was a pasty, sickly gray. The air in the room became thick and heavy, charged with the unspoken weight of $17,000, 1,000 broken promises, and a lifetime of casual cruelty. I walked slowly towards the table, my footsteps echoing in the quiet room. I didn't smile, I didn't scowl. My expression was one of placid, impenetrable neutrality. I stopped at the head of the table and placed my own sleek, expensive pen down beside the lease. My mother found her voice first, a strangled, disbelieving croak. "Clara? What? What are you doing here?" I looked from her face to my father's, meeting their stunned, horrified gazes without flinching. "I'm the owner," I said, my voice perfectly level, devoid of any emotion at all. "You're my new tenants." The silence that followed my pronouncement was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and life out of the small room. It was filled with the ghosts of every ignored achievement, every dismissive comment, every dollar they had siphoned from my future to fuel their delusions. My mother's hand, which was still hovering over the lease, began to tremble violently. The pen clattered from her grasp onto the table. My father, who had always been a man of loud opinions and booming pronouncements, was rendered utterly mute. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a dawning horror, as if seeing me for the first time, not as his quiet, pliable daughter, but as a stranger, a figure of immense and terrifying power. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, no words coming out. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Finally, his pride, that stubborn, foolish pride that had cost them everything, sputtered to life. "This is a joke," he rasped, his voice rough with disbelief. "A sick, twisted joke. You did this to humiliate us." He looked at me, searching for a sign of malice, of vengeful glee. He found none. I simply stood there, a calm arbiter of their new reality. "Humiliation was never the goal, Dad," I replied, my voice still unnervingly steady. "This is a business transaction. You needed a place to live. I had a property available. Your application was approved. It's really quite simple." The word application landed like a physical blow. The idea that they had to apply and be approved by me, the daughter they had deemed unworthy of her own college fund, was an indignity too great to comprehend. My mother burst into tears. Not the manipulative, crocodile tears I had seen her use so many times before, but great, gulping, hopeless sobs of pure shame. "Oh, Richard," she wept, burying her face in her hands. "What have we done?" For the first time, she wasn't looking for a way out. She was confronting the dead end they had built for themselves. They were trapped. They had no other options. Their friends, the ones they'd entertained in their large, now-lost home, were nowhere to be found now that the money was gone. Their family, the extended network of cousins and aunts, had been exhausted by Leo's constant requests for loans. I was their landlord. I was their only hope. It was a checkmate I had never intended to orchestrate, but one that fate had delivered with brutal efficiency. With a shaking hand, my father picked up the pen. He didn't look at the document. He just signed his name on the line. His signature a spiky, angry scrawl. My mother, through her tears, did the same. Her handwriting, usually so neat and controlled, was a wobbly, pathetic mess. They slid the signed documents across the table. Jessica, ever the professional, gathered them, her face a mask of neutrality. I pushed my own pen forward. "The security deposit and the first month's rent," I said, my tone as mild as if I were asking for the time. "Jessica can accept a cashier's check." My father flinched, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. He slid it across the table without looking at me. It was done. I picked up my pen and performed the final flourish, signing my name under the line labeled Owner/Landlord. I pushed a copy of the fully executed lease back towards them. "Welcome home," I said, the words hanging in the air, stripped of all warmth. "Rent is due on the 1st of every month via the online portal. Late fees are assessed on the 5th. Any maintenance requests must also be submitted through the portal. I have a zero-tolerance policy for late payments. Are we clear?" My father just nodded, his gaze fixed on the cheap laminate of the tabletop. My mother couldn't even look up. I turned and walked out of the townhouse without a backward glance. The click of the door closing behind me, the final punctuation on the most devastatingly successful business deal of my life. The first few weeks of their tenancy were a masterclass in awkward, strained silence. They moved their few remaining belongings into the townhouse under the cover of darkness, as if ashamed to be seen. I had installed a smart lock on the door, so there was no formal key handover. They had a code. The landlord-tenant relationship was, as I had intended, strictly impersonal and digital. I was determined to enforce the boundaries they had spent a lifetime trampling. A few days after they moved in, I received the first test, an email notification from the property management portal. Tenant request. The faucet in the master bathroom is dripping. It was from my mother's email address. I assigned the work order to my regular plumber, who fixed it the next day. There was no phone call, no discussion, just a problem and a solution, handled through the proper channels. They tried to circumvent the system. My mother called my personal cell phone a week later. "Clara, honey? It's your mother." The use of the word honey was a desperate grasp at a familiarity we no longer shared. "I know I'm supposed to use the portal thing," she stammered, "but the refrigerator is making a funny noise. I was hoping you could just pop over and take a look." I could picture her, standing in that sterile kitchen, trying to will our old dynamic back into existence. "Mom," I said, my voice polite but firm. "If you believe the refrigerator is malfunctioning, please describe the issue in a maintenance request on the portal. That's how we keep a record of all issues with the property. I'll have an appliance technician take a look at it." "But, can't you just," she started, her voice pleading. "No," I said, cutting her off gently. "I can't. That's not how this works. Is there anything else?" The defeated sigh on the other end was my answer. She hung up. An hour later, a formal maintenance request appeared in the portal. The biggest test, however, came in the form of my brother, Leo, who had been conveniently absent during the foreclosure and eviction, finally surfaced. He showed up at the townhouse unannounced, full of righteous fury. I know this because my father, in a moment of bizarre panicked honesty, called me. "He's here," my father whispered into the phone. "Leo, he's yelling. He's calling you a monster." I could hear Leo's voice in the background, loud and accusatory. "How could she do this to you? After everything you did for her? She's trying to humiliate you. We should sue her." I stayed silent on my end, just listening. Then I heard something that truly shocked me. I heard my father's voice, raw with a new, unfamiliar anger, directed not at me, but at his golden child. "You shut your mouth," Richard roared. This is your fault. Every last bit of it. Your schemes, your lies. You bankrupted us. The roof over your mother's head right now is there because of your sister's mercy. Do you understand me? Mercy, so you will show her respect." There was a stunned silence, followed by the sound of a door slamming. My father was breathing heavily into the phone. "He's gone," he said. It was the first time in Leo's entire life that he had faced a single, tangible consequence from our parents. The foundation of their dysfunctional trinity had finally cracked. The months that followed were quiet. The rent was always paid on time, electronically, on the first of the month. The maintenance requests were few and far between. My parents, it seemed, were model tenants. The humiliation that had been so potent in the beginning slowly began to curdle into something else, something I couldn't quite name. It was a grudging, resentful respect. They were seeing me not as their daughter, but as the person who held the power, the person whose rules they had to follow to survive. The dynamic I had dreamed of, one where they saw my value, had arrived in the most twisted, ironic way possible. One evening, I found a voicemail on my phone from a number I knew was theirs. I let it sit for a day before listening. It was my mother. Her voice was hesitant, stripped of its usual manipulative undertones. "Clara, it's your mother. I just wanted to say, I know we haven't talked. I'm sorry. There was a long pause, filled with the sound of her shaky breath. We were wrong. About the money. About everything. We thought Leo was going to be so successful. We were so proud of him. We were proud of you too, you know. With your math and your saving. We didn't know how to show it. It was quieter. We didn't understand it. I'm so sorry, Clara. It was the apology I had craved for more than a decade, but hearing it now, it felt hollow. It was a deathbed confession, offered only after they had lost everything. It was an apology born of desperation, not genuine remorse. I didn't delete the message, but I didn't reply either. The words had been said, but the trust they had shattered could never be rebuilt. The true turning point, the sign that something had fundamentally and irrevocably shifted, came about a year after they moved in. My father called me. It wasn't about the townhouse. His voice was different, smaller, devoid of its usual booming authority. "Clara," he said, "I got a job." I was taken aback. "A job? Part-time," he said quickly. "At the hardware store down the street, stocking shelves. It's something." He wasn't asking for my approval, or complaining about his fate. He was just reporting a fact. It was the most honest, unvarnished communication I had ever had with him. There was a pause. "I was wondering," he said, his voice hesitant, "if maybe you'd be willing to get a cup of coffee sometime. Not here, not at your place, just at the coffee shop downtown. Neutral territory." I thought about it for a long moment. Forgiveness felt like an impossible mountain to climb. But I realized the meeting wasn't about them anymore. It wasn't about granting them absolution or reopening old wounds. It was about me. It was about acknowledging that I had won, not just the financial battle, but the internal one. I no longer needed their approval. I no longer feared their judgment. Their power over me was gone. Standing on the solid ground of my own life, I could afford to be gracious. "Okay, Dad," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I can do that." That townhouse was never really about revenge. It was about balance. It was about forcing them to live, for the first time, in a world governed by rules and consequences. The same world they had so carelessly forced me into all those years ago. It was the closing of a ledger that had been unbalanced for my entire life. In the end, I learned the most important lesson of all. Your value is not determined by the people who refuse to see it. It is something you build within yourself, brick by brick, until you have constructed a fortress so strong that their opinions are nothing more than wind against the stone. My family is not defined by blood anymore. It is defined by the people who showed up for me in the trenches, by the friends who became my sisters, by the mentors who saw my potential. They are the ones who occupy the rooms of my heart. The townhouse is just a property, a rental, and my parents are just my tenants. Before I go, I want to thank you for listening to my story. It's not an easy one to tell, but sharing it feels like the final step in reclaiming my own narrative. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been severely underestimated by the people who should have believed in you the most? How did you find the strength to build your own path? Share your story in the comments below, because every story shared makes someone else feel a little less alone. And if my journey resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and vindication. Share it with someone who might need to hear that it's possible to build a beautiful life from the rubble of a painful past. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Remember, sometimes the greatest act of love and loyalty you can perform is the one you show to yourself. I wish you all strength and peace,